All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we host this webinar, Road Tripping Through Learning Needs Analysis. Where do you want to go? Just thank you all for joining us today. This is being recorded, so we'll make sure that this will go out to you all within 24 hours after we finish up today. So let's go ahead and skip to the next slide. And just before I provide the little overview about who we are at Ingenuiti, I just wanted to note that the chat should be open, so feel free to engage there. And then if you have any questions, please push those through the question and answer icon, and we'll try to address those as we can as we're going through. And if not, we'll certainly review those at the end. So just a little bit about Ingenuiti, who we are. So Ingenuiti is really a global learning solutions company. So we provide custom learning, design, and development, everything from analysis, what we'll talk about today, through custom learning design. And we also provide translation and localization, so a turnkey approach to localizing content. And lastly, we're a full service staff augmentation company where we're able to support the needs of training departments through staff augmentation. All right, Scott, let's go into the next one. A little bit about us. We did have a little shift this morning. Jerry was not feeling well, and so he was not able to attend. Typically, he would be the one to host these for us, and then we'd have some panelists. So I'm Adam Ealing. I'm the Vice President of Client Services at Ingenuiti. So I'm stepping in today to be the host and joined by Tracy Contrino and Miriam Taylor. Tracy and Miriam, would you mind introducing yourselves?
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Tracy Contrino. I am the Director of Project Management here at Ingenuiti. Been with the company for years, been in project management for the e-learning space going on just about 20 years. And I'm really excited to talk about analysis today. So Miriam?
Sure, thanks, Tracy. So my name is Miriam Taylor. Goodness. And I'm the Client Success Manager here at Ingenuiti. I have about 30 years background in learning and development, starting as an instructional designer and working my way through to lead teams and to work with who originally was going to be our host, Dr. Jerry Zanstra, on a whole lot of projects. I spend my time now working with the learning team and then also with our clients to make sure that they get the right solutions, that things are scoped properly. And then also what I'm doing today, which I really enjoy, the webinars and creating articles and podcasts for this company, Ingenuiti.
All right, thank you both. Let's move on to the next one. So Miriam, maybe you can just tee us off here with the pre-trip checklist, which is critical on any trip or adventure, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess a pre-trip checklist isn't critical if you are more carefree and free-spirited, but for those of us that are taking families along and find yourself at a location without whatever it is that you needed desperately, like shoes or something important like that, a pre-trip checklist is real critical. So all we wanted to do today was really just give you three broad principles. So as we're working our way through each of the waypoints in our road trip, you kind of have these in mind. So the first one is that as we go through the waypoints, not everyone will take the same amount of time and effort. Similar to a road trip, you stop at a gas station, that doesn't take nearly as long, at least hopefully, as maybe stopping for dinner. So as we talk through each of these essentials in this webinar, just bear in mind, they're not going to all take the same amount of time. You may have already done the work for one of them, but we want you to keep that in mind. Secondly, they're not really distinct and independent. So even though we've listed 6 of them, there's often a lot of overlap, and you may get at answers to one of the parts of the needs analysis through doing a different part of it. So don't feel like each part is very distinct and must be done independently. And then lastly, you're not going to even use every one of these. for each project. So for example, if you're working on a small e-learning project that is perhaps part of a larger project you've already scoped and you know right where it fits in, you may need to do a couple of these just to make sure you're on the right track, but there's no need for a very large scale detailed needs analysis. But if you're about to launch a big program, a lot of visibility in your company, multiple parts, probably needing translation and localization, all those kinds of things, then you really do want to take the time to do a thorough needs analysis. So those are just 3 thoughts to keep in mind as we move forward and take a look at each one of these waypoints on our trip.
That's great. Thanks, Miriam. Okay, let's take a look at the first one and over here. So where do you want to go? Our first waypoint is where do you want to go? Hey, Miriam, you can provide a little overview there of what that's going to cover.
Absolutely. So where do you want to go is, and I should mention that for each of these waypoints now, I'll give a brief overview and then we'll spend a few minutes actually looking at some specific questions you would want to include in your needs analysis for this topic or this waypoint, and then even some examples. And Tracy's going to be able to provide some great ones there. But to begin with, I think often, especially if you're a learning team embedded within a company, it's easy to just dive into a project because unfortunately things come to you needing to be done yesterday. And rather than taking the time to do a needs analysis, we just plunge right in. And so it's important to at least ask some of these 10,000-foot questions. What is basically create a little bit of a roadmap. And so if we want to go to the next slide, I can just talk about some of those questions. For example, how would you describe your current learning status? And again, I think maybe you already know that, but maybe you're a company in transition, post-COVID, you're looking at creating a lot of e-learning, or maybe you're transitioning back to some classroom-based training. So just kind of keeping your eye on that ball of where are you at overall? How would the program you're about to analyze fit into that? And I should also mention, I'm not gonna go through all of these. You're all professionals, you could read them, but I want to hit on at least the top 2, because the second question is what are your goals or your KPIs or metrics does your company have? I really hope you have visibility into that and that's really important to you, but we don't always. And so if you don't know how this request ties into your larger company KPIs, you really should ask and find out, because and the bottom line is learning and development teams are always, pressed to sort of prove their worth, as much as we don't love that. Learning and development teams, I'm sorry. We don't love that, but knowing where the current program you're working on fits in, how it can benefit, how it can help the company reach the KPIs. That's really important to know to help justify your budget, but also obviously, your goal is to help the entire company move forward. Tracy,
And I think, Miriam, sorry. I was just going to say what I find interesting too, especially about some of those lower half questions, is that as we're talking to clients, sometimes they have not thought through those questions. And that's certainly where our expertise comes in to continue to formulate the discussions with them. But it's interesting because they often don't know, or they'll have dissenting ideas. And then it's interesting on our part too to be able to hear them and sort of work through maybe what the priority is and help them reach a resolution.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, a big part of going through a needs analysis is consensus building. And we are going to talk in a later, waypoint about how to build your team, but just making sure that everybody's on the same page. For example, what are your internal objectives for your learning team? I mean, if you're not all on the same page about the goal, it's going to be a tough project. So uncovering these at the beginning is really important.
Agreed.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's move on to, oh, yep, almost forgot here. We have some key quotes or some quotes from movies that are related to the theme of a road trip. So we'll pull these up as we're going through each of these 6 waypoints. This one, 50 years from now, when you're looking back at your life, don't you want to be able to say you had the guts to get in the car? Anybody know what that one's from? Tracy's favorite movie, Transformers, the first one. You all probably
Mhm.
already knew that, but a little piece of information about Tracy there. So we'll move on to waypoint
I
number
did love
2.
Transformers.
Yeah.
Well, they're on the 12th one now. The first couple maybe were pretty good.
Yeah, I was gonna
Uh,
say, yeah, the first few, yes.
Yes.
all right. Well, what do you want to experience? All right, Miriam, what will we cover here?
Yeah, so, and I also wanted to point out, we had a comment in the chat from Bruce, who, it's a great point, whether you're an outside vendor, such, that like Ingenuity, or whether you're an internal L&D team, you do almost get a little bit of a pass to ask that what they might consider rude question, but the
Mhm.
question is like, why does this even matter? Is this truly a learning problem? And so sometimes we can kind of poke at those in the needs assessment in a good way, in a way that is, again, consensus building, but it allows us to ask some of those questions. So, but moving on to what do you want to experience? So this really gets at a big question that you can ask the business unit you're working with, or we often ask our clients, which is, what do you want to be able to, what knowledge do you want your learner to have, or what skills, or what values? Now, often a learning program will get at all of these, but there's usually one overriding factor. Perhaps it's skill-based training, and we really need people to follow the checklist to do a specific skill. Perhaps it's just knowledge. It's one of those every year type compliance where we need people to know and understand the changes. Or I think the longest and the most difficult one to achieve, but probably the most valuable, what beliefs and attitudes do we want to change? Are we doing something around company culture, communication skills? But let's take a look then at some of the questions that we'd like to think about here. They're pretty straightforward. I already, spoke to them to a certain degree, but honestly, asking those can really hone in on what your core objectives are. So what knowledge does the learner need to have? What skills do you want them to have? Or what attitudes or values? And when put that way, I think our team has found a lot of success, rather than throwing out a question like, well, what are your objectives? That's if you're working with a business unit that doesn't think like instructional designers, that's kind of a vague and confusing question to them. But if you start to hone in on specific, like what knowledge do they need to have, or what skills are you really looking for, that makes it a little more tangible for them to think about, and you start to draw out good answers.
Mhm. And it also helps us understand the type of learning to build that would be most fitting for what they want to ultimately have their learners learn, right? So whether we have scenarios, or whether it's just real quick question answer type things, or something in between, it's very enriching discussion for those purposes.
Right, and it allows you, I think, as the learning and development team, or us, to really kind of shine. There may be,
Hmm. Hmm.
there's a lot of new ways to deliver things, and it allows
Yeah.
us to offer some of those choices that they may have never thought about before.
Yes.
All right, Adam, what's our quote for this one?
I want adventure in their great wide somewhere. I'm sure there's somebody who knows this one. And I should know this. I have a couple young daughters, so any thoughts?
Are you
This
giving
one
us a
is
cue there? Oh,
mm-hmm. Oh, Aaron got it. Beauty and the Beast. Perfect. All right. I figured
oh, so
somebody at
did
least would know that
Kathy.
one.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Good job,
Yep.
everyone.
That's a classic. All
Yeah.
right. Waypoint number 3. Who will be joining you on the journey?
Right. So this is, I think, fairly common for a learning team to think through, right? What is my learner persona? What is my learner profile? But I think that along with familiarity comes contempt, right? Like the old phrase. So it's easy to, oh, well, we've developed, we're an internal learning and development team. We've developed this content for this business unit for years now. Well, it doesn't hurt to still ask the question, who are your learners? How will they be accessing the content? And we'll get to more of these questions in a minute, but even if it's just a 10-second pause to make sure, are we all on the same page? Is this the same situation as it was before? If not, why? It's really important to still ask, who is the learner in this situation?
Hmm.
We can look at some of those questions then. And I know, Tracy, you have some good examples. Again, I won't go through all of these, but what's the average age range? What are the educational qualifications? So we'll often get requests to develop, if it's compliance, it's company-wide, or it may be other company-wide training. So we could be talking about somebody who is perhaps in manufacturing, working on a factory floor, all the way up to the C-suite and managers and front office and everyone in between. How is that going to then affect how we write this? What does the reading level need to be at? Is English the first language? We're often assuming no. So do we need translation? Do we need to be careful about examples we give, idioms, all that kind of thing? There's a lot that goes into defining a learner. And I would encourage you, if you haven't spent some time developing some learner personas, that you take a little time and develop some of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, these are all great points, and I think that certainly those of you in the project management sphere, but even other areas of L&D have managed projects where maybe a needs analysis wasn't done at all, or it was done not thoroughly.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're left with a project that started one way with assumptions that were not correct. And and a thorough needs analysis really helps get at the heart of what a client wants, and it's just so important, and I think it really sets up your projects for success.
Yeah, and I had here, I don't know if you want to call this an experienced traveler tip or whatever you want to call it, but if you have a moment to take a step back, or as a learning and development team, like I mentioned, do that for several groups in your company. One thing that we found is, as we're gathering that information, we've then actually used AI to generate some real people personas, meaning I don't have to take the time and effort to give them a name and all of that, but I can kind of dump that data in, and I come up with a little story about this person and who they are and their demographics, and where they are in the company and what their interests are. And then this is something I can pull up all the time and reference. But again, that's kind of like, often our needs come to us and they have to be done yesterday. But sometimes it's okay to slow down and take a step back to make sure that we can get this right moving forward. So what is our quote, Adam?
I think a lot of people will get this one right. Let's see. I love waking up in the morning, not knowing what's going to happen or who I'm going to meet or where I'm going to wind up. The movie came out a little over 25 years ago, so that might make you feel dated. Let's see. You have any good guesses here? Aaron Brown with the Forrest Gump. Right about the same time period. I do believe they might have came out in the same year. Let's just say a lot of people didn't make it to their destination during this movie. Titanic. Yep, Samuel grabbed it. Yep, Titanic. That's Jack, I think, is the character name. All right, over 25 years ago when it came out. Okay, waypoint number 4. What size trip will you take? Scoping the project. I think this is a really critical one.
Yeah, and I would say that this is where traditionally we land. Like, we often will say, scoping the project, that is our entire needs assessment. And these are the questions we jump to right away. And I get that because of the urgency of the issue. But as we've mentioned several times, if we can slow down and ask some of these surrounding questions, these surrounding waypoints that we're talking about, then by the time we get to actually scoping the project, we're going to have, I think, a much more informed understanding of what the project is. I mean, any road trip takes a lot of planning and organization and little details. And if you have small children, you've ever let them pack themselves, you probably want to check those, because I've ended up places with a suitcase full of, one time my son brought his rock collection, so that was super helpful and also very heavy.
Miriam, it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. I know my teenagers are almost worse than when they were toddlers or middle schoolers packing.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, you think it gets better, but no.
It does not. And so just asking the right critical questions is similar to double checking those suitcases and making sure they're coming along in the first place. But if we want to take a look at some of the questions for scoping, again here, we've actually had about 15 of them, maybe more, and we just didn't want to put them all on the slide. But Tracy, I'm going to let you talk about the budgets and project dates and that kind of a thing. Why don't you go ahead and then I'll kind of jump down and handle some of the ones on the bottom.
Yeah, sure. As Miriam was saying, I mean, these are all critical questions to ask in a needs analysis phase and scoping phase. But something I was talking about with Miriam just before this was what I found too is that a lot of times these questions will come out during the early stages of a needs analysis if the questions are posed in such a way and the discussions are rich enough. Notice by the time you get down to scoping, there's very little left. So that's always a plus too, if you're, because I feel like that's how you know that you're in a successful situation of completing your needs analysis. But if not, most of these questions tend to be straightforward, unless the client maybe doesn't have an exact budget or needs certain approvals or something like that. But usually these are easy to get and are more just checked boxes, I think, at the end, but very important to remember.
Yeah, and if we take a look near the bottom, questions such as, and I'll talk about places where we've been, I have certainly made the mistake of not asking or making an assumption. Do we have existing course materials? And that is a question that you want to probe into a little bit, because I've often found that our clients' definition, or you've all, I'm sure, experienced this too, their definition of existing source material and organization and where it's stored might be very different than our definition of organization. So we've had dumps of OneDrives, and we've had to work through 40,000 documents. We've been given things on napkins before, and none of those are wrong. That's our job, right? To help sift through that. So that's great. But knowing ahead of time what we're walking into, or even, best case scenario, we have some existing e-learning material. We would like you to, make it more sophisticated and add better interaction, and also add additional content to it, or voices, or whatever. That's a great place to start, but we don't always walk into that. So what is the desired seat time? That's another question where we have ways of calculating, obviously, how long it's going to be, word count, interaction time, all of that. But if you don't ask and you find out later, oh no, there was a required seat time of 15 minutes, now it's too late and you're scrambling to figure that out. And then I do want to jump up to the 508 ADA compliance. And we also had a great comment from Bruce. If anyone is in Canada, there's Bill 96. We certainly have, there's European standards, there's US standards in terms of making sure we ask the client. And I have been burned myself. And often, to be fair, our clients don't always know. So it's a great question to ask, because it's something, again, as a learning team, we bring that expertise. So what level of 508 compliance do you need? And depending on who it is, you may get a blank look, which is the opportunity to say, well, here are the various levels. Is there a company standard? Do you need to do some checking? But that can, if you don't know that and you develop materials and then you find out, that is a massive headache and often requires a lot of reworking. So it's really important to ask.
Yes, and exactly what JP was just saying here too, another great comment, because scoping is often the very first thing to change. And I would say particularly the start and completion dates are the most fluid, even though we're often told that they are carved in stone. Somehow it's usually not, it's more like carved in Jello, is what we find. And I think that also the format of the final delivery modules is one that clients think they know, and then it's, as we get closer to the end of the project, we find out that they don't, either because they don't understand what a SCORM package is, they don't understand how to load it into their LMS, they might not understand that they get the storyboard or don't get the final storyboard, those types of things. So
yeah,
yes,
I think that's a good call out, Tracy. We've had a situation in the past where a client had a desire for a web-based training material, and when we got to the end of the project, or towards the end of the project, they determined that they wouldn't be able to provide access to the LMS to this particular group of team members that they had. So, just what is the delivery format? How can people access that content? There are various levels of access throughout any organization. The desired seat time, I think, is another interesting one. A lot of times based around learning objectives. So we might, I think, as learning professionals receive a request, it needs to be a short course. It needs to be 20 minutes or less. And then there's 15 learning objectives that need to be covered. And, beyond having them as a bulleted list, how are we going to train to each of those learning objectives? Really doesn't fit in there. So just understanding what those parameters are is really critical up front. And it can be tough conversations. Well, maybe we're going to have to split this into multiple courses and, to get the desired outcome. But these are all really good ones. If you have any other thoughts, definitely please put them in here. JP, thanks for pointing out about scope creep. That certainly is something that can be a villain in many projects.
And then
all right.
One final thing I
Tracy?
wanted to say, sorry, before we moved on, is that I also feel like these core questions in particular are the ones that help shape assumptions that
Mhm.
later you'll put in your SOW. So certainly what you're building in the needs analysis as well, but these are the ones that are really important. So when you do have those changes that come in, if you have a tight assumptions, then you'll have something to fall back on.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
And one thing that I really appreciate is that, so going to the question of source materials and then timeline, if you have the ability to bake in some time at the beginning, because it's a one thing to say, first of all, two things, I should say. We can theoretically start our timeline tomorrow, but we all know often those source materials will trickle in over the next week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. So that's always a good question to ask. Are they readily available? That's going to impact the timeline if they're not, and that's fine. And then beyond that, even to be able to bake in a little time, because as an instructional designer, I can see all the source materials, but it takes me a little while to wrap my head around them, for the team to take a look at them, to determine some approaches to it, and just kind of familiarize ourselves with it, even if that's just a day. But that's something that I think is like a hidden aspect in a timeline that we often forget about. And then that can really affect end delivery if we're not upfront with the team we're working with or the client we're working with, and help them understand what we're doing. Alejandro, good question. How to give external reviewers access to the course. That is actually something that we often build into a kickoff meeting. But, and Adam and Tracy, I'll let you talk, but depending on the tool you're using, there are baked in review possibilities for them. So I'll let you talk about that, but it's important. You're right. Like, you have to let them have time to review and have a tool that collects comments in a way that is measured, and you have the ability to mark them off and catalog that they've been completed.
Yeah, no, I think you captured it pretty well there, Miriam. We do talk about it during kickoff, but it's not really until we finish storyboard that then we usually set aside one of our status meetings somewhere before alpha delivery to go through the review of alpha. So to make sure that all reviewers do have access to be able to look at the course, and we also confirm review times as well, just in case other stakeholders snuck in before or during, I should say, the time between storyboard and alpha.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what Alejandro is pointing out there, regulatory reviews. So we see this a lot, obviously, in the medical device, life sciences space, but a good call out for aerospace and the airline industry, FAA reviews. And so there could be food and drug, reviews that need to take place depending on the content. So yeah, certainly beyond the 508 ADA compliance, what regulatory reviews need to take place as a component of this training, those are definitely items we want to make sure we establish early on. Okay, let's see what our quote is here. All right, this is a good classic one here. Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. Look at that,
that was resounding.
Anyone?
Aaron was the fastest, but we had like 6 answers within
Yeah,
3
yeah.
seconds. So Ferris Bueller so far is the most, at least seems like the most watched, or at least the quote is the most remembered of any of those, which I don't doubt it. Okay, let's move on to the next waypoint. Waypoint number 5. Who can help you make this trip successful?
Sure. So this seems obvious, and also I think um, you might ask, well, why is this here? Again, like I mentioned at the beginning, they're not necessarily in specific order, although number one, obviously getting that big picture probably should come first. But I think we often think, well, I have my learning and development team, or I have my group, everybody has their role, but it doesn't hurt to ask the question again. Like, who would be an expert? Is there somebody we're not thinking of that perhaps could add to the team? Part of this needs analysis process is determining what roles are required, both from our client or from your external business unit, and then in your team as well. Who needs to be involved? And there's several reasons why. One, it affects timeline, but more importantly, we need expertise in certain areas. I just think about, I can't tell you how many trips have you ever, one of your children or yourself called shotgun, right? Then there's a big argument about whether shotgun works or not. That's a very American, I get, idiom, but who's going to sit in the front seat? And from that illustration, the joke, of course, is whoever calls shotgun first gets in the front seat. But is that really correct? If we extend the analogy, in my family, the person that sat in the front seat was the child who always got car sick because nobody wanted to deal with that. And then the front seat was the best place for them. So that analogy here is like, let's just think through the team one more time and make sure we have everybody in the right seat with the expertise. Who do we need to maybe bring in that we normally wouldn't? Are there subject matter experts out there? How often do they have to be included, and stakeholders? And we'll talk about those in a minute, but that's what we're thinking about here is how do we build our team and who should be on it? So one of the things that I like to think about, and it's not, a full-blown task analysis, but what tasks need to be completed? Again, now I've done my scoping. Perhaps this project is going to require an animation that requires some expertise from someone, or perhaps it requires 2 subject matter experts we don't often work with, but here's we need to include them on it. So and then what roles, not just what tasks do we need to get done, but what roles are required to complete those tasks? Is it large and complex? Do you need to bring in perhaps an additional project manager to help manage certain details? I know at Ingenuity, we have a project manager, but we also, when we work on translation and localization, we obviously bring in different roles at that point because that's their area of expertise. What other people might need to be included, and even what about contingencies? I say that because we were planning on Jerry hosting this webinar today, and we're all moving roles, and it worked out great. But contingencies are, especially if it's a project with large, a lot of visibility. Who can fill multiple roles for you? What happens if there's project creep? Can you get additional resources? And Tracy, Adam, I know you have a ton of other things you can add here, so I'll let you kind of add more to these.
Yeah, I don't, that was a pretty good list, Miriam, to be honest. I can't think of any. I don't know if anyone of our participants have any ideas additionally.
Yeah, I just think like, having predetermined areas ahead of time is critical, right? I kind of think of that like, I don't know, going back to on a road trip with my young children, if you rely on just a rest stop to be open. I don't know what
Yeah.
it is, but since COVID, maybe it started before, it's like 90% of them are always closed. I don't know who determined that and when they decide to open them again, but I mean, it could be 40 miles, 50 miles in between, and young kids, of course, can't wait that long. Similarly, timelines might not be able to wait. And so what types of avenues do we have to get a project done if there's a really tight window of time? We work with some great learning and development teams that when others in the organization come to ask them for a project, they're going to ask them timeline up front. if they have a budget, and then they'll pull us in to support them. You might have a similar situation or not yet. And if not yet, that's a good thing to establish, because there's always going to be too many projects, I think, for any, corporate learning and development team to handle in a given period of time. That's just kind of the way things go. But yeah, any other thoughts on this? If you have anything to add, we'd love to call those out right now as well.
Well, and while you're typing, I will certainly add here, we talked about this multiple times in other webinars and things, but there is the hidden stakeholder, and they're hidden for a reason, and sometimes there's nothing we can do to find them. But I will say one question that I've asked at this point is, so let's say I'm talking to this business unit and I'm saying, who needs to give approval? We already talked about that, right? Do we have external? Do we have legal? Do we have other governing bodies? But what about, maybe it's a smaller project and your project sponsor says, well, I just need to get approval for my boss. Okay, great. Well, here's a question that I've learned to ask. What about your boss's boss? And they may say, oh, no, we don't have to worry about it. But they may say, oh, yeah, I hadn't thought about that, because how often do we hand somebody to review and they're like, well, I just showed it to 4 or 5 other people on my team. Okay, great. Now we have a lot of other stakeholders. So one thing we can also sort of do to minimize that is, that's great, but I'm going to need one point of contact that's giving me any feedback. And we can't always avoid the hidden stakeholder, but they are out there. I love this question. So Jeremy, thank you for sharing. I'm just trying to read it as I talk here. So that is such a key question. Can this problem be solved without a learning solution? I know all of you work in places where there's a problem, so let's throw it at the learning team to solve it. I'll give an example from a long time ago in my history, but we were designing learning for a US-based team who had a team in Mexico. And there were a lot of errors, there were it was manufacturing, just a lot of defects, a lot of pricey issues. And so we were asked to design e-learning for them. And so we did, because we weren't smart enough at that point, Jeremy, to ask, is this really a learning problem? So we actually were fortunate enough to be flown down there to visit. Well, one of the things we discovered, again, because we were not culturally aware at that point, what was happening is people were being hired and then stuck in a very small room to sit on computers and do e-learning all day. Where this is both a cultural and also a learning question. They would have been much more invested. They would have learned far more quickly if they were actually like just shadowing somebody on the job floor or on the floor. Now, that is somewhat of a learning problem for sure, but it was more of a cultural problem and a delivery problem. And by figuring that out, we were able to solve a lot of the other issues. So that's a huge point. Just making sure, is this even a learning problem? And we can kind of get at that. Some of these needs assessment questions to determine if learning can even solve it. Yeah, Bruce, that's another good question. I actually just went through that with a client earlier today. So how have you done learning in the past is always a great question. So have you rolled out e-learning and it didn't go well? That's important to know, because we already have a hurdle. Is this the first time you've ever, and I would say this doesn't happen as much as it used to, but just like COVID and post-COVID, and even before that, is this the first time your organization has rolled out a pretty lengthy e-learning program? If that's the case, that there's a lot of things that go into that. Like, we need to put additional directions. We need to make sure navigation is crystal clear. We need to provide information like, how long is this going to take you? Use the right arrow to click, like all of those things, as opposed to a company who might say, we've done e-learning for years, everyone's very used to it. A lot of companies now are moving back to more social learning, and they're going back to the classroom. And so really helping our clients or your business units think through, what's the best way to deliver this based on what's been done in the past, based on what appetite are people just tired of looking at screens. So those are really good questions to ask. And Aaron, I like your point, causal analysis, just like, what is the real cause? What is the root cause? And what do we need to get at in order to solve that problem? Adam, do you want to, I don't want to, I talked a long time there. If you two want to share anything, otherwise we can go on to our quote too.
I like what Bruce had called out. It's a lot of times we force feed people the same type of content. Is that really working? I think it's like the saying that the floggings will continue until morale improves, right? It's like the e-learnings will continue until morale improves. Well, yeah, it might not be the best solution. It might not fit that right there. So I think that was really great. But yeah, let's see where we're at, and then we'll get into number 6. All right, so adventure is out there. This is from a Pixar movie. Oh, I didn't even have to give the clue. Aaron already had it up. Yeah, that's a great one. A great movie for not quite a road trip, a balloon trip, I guess, but it's great. One of my kids' favorites, one of mine as well. Okay, number 6, our last waypoint for the webinar today. How can we excite fellow road trippers?
Yeah, so this one might seem a little strange, but it's honestly something I've seen missed so often because we really need to talk about it at the beginning of any project. So if this is maybe just a small, couple modules being created, maybe it's an update, this perhaps won't apply. So back to my pre-trip checklist, not everything applies. But what I've often seen is a pretty large initiative that ties to company goals. It's important, it has a lot of visibility, and the learning team loves it, right? Because if you build it, we just think they'll come because we love it. We think, and we put our hearts and souls into it, and it's super interesting and engaging, and we forgot to tell anybody. And so Monday morning, everybody wakes up and they get an email that says, take this training, and oh, nobody knows anything about it. They're certainly not motivated to do it. And so what we want to talk about here is, what is our communication plan look like? How do we create excitement for these programs? We have to put on our marketing hat. And I know personally that's hard for me. Like I said, I'm an instructional designer at heart. I built this thing. It's super cool. Why don't you like it? And so some of the questions we need to ask, as I alluded to, is this a larger program? If it is, should we give this its own brand and its own logo within our company parameters, like, to set this apart, to call out how important it is? We talk about a road trip, either hopefully after your trip, but there's always pictures on social media and friends and family are asking how it went. Oh, that's so exciting. And similarly, what can we do to build excitement before it even comes out? So obviously, we can send emails, but are there other company communication channels like chat channels or intranets, things like that? Sometimes, depending on the size of it, we've done programs before where there's actual physical assets, even in multiple locations, banners, shirts. Can we use social media to build that excitement? Can we do like a contest? Can we do some like video or animations to get everyone excited? Now, would we do this for everything? Of course not. But that's why it's in this needs analysis, because we just want to ask the question, is this so important that we need to think about how we're going to market it to get buy-in and motivation? And maybe the answer is no, that's fine, we move on. But if we don't ask the question, we get all the way to the end and we realize we didn't do anything to build excitement. Michelle said, maybe I'm just not understanding. Movie commercial types of communication.
Yeah, so put out like commercials leading up to the training. Yeah, that's a really great idea. So yeah, creating commercials to go out to to the broader team about what's coming. I think that's a really fun idea. And one of the things we've been looking at is there's a lot of technologies out there right now that allow you to create video content much faster. So obviously there's AI-based programs that are coming out, and also just things like Adobe Express, which allows non-video editors to kind of get in there and do some of that video promotional type material. So I think that's a really good call out, Michelle. Anyone else had a way that they've been able to successfully help promote training and drive interest ahead of a large training initiative?
And while you're typing, I will also add that part of the reason we asked this question is because I think it forces myself and our team to think like that. Because again, putting on my instructional design hat, right? We've all seen the programs, right? Where the learner will, and then we have 4 objectives listed. What this does is it forces me to put on my marketing hat and ask the question, so what? Why should they even care about this? And then I sort of transform my thoughts into what are the benefits? This is what you're going to get out of it. This is why it's going to be great. Here's how it's going to help you do your job better. Here's how it's going to help improve morale, or here's how you're going to learn new skill sets for a different position. And it honestly, it forces me to, again, think about the learner and why this should matter to them, and then communicate that in a good and better way.
Yeah, what's in it for me?
Yes.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I
that
was
was a
gonna.
good call out. Go ahead, Tracy.
No problem. I also was going to say too that I think it's important to note that a lot of the points on this particular slide can also be relevant to internal training, right? So this doesn't only have to be client facing, but a lot of times for internal trainings, you might also need excitement. You might need to generate interest for whatever reason. So something to think about too as you're thinking about your own learning at the department level or company wide or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, a new standard operating procedure. We had a new system come in, whatever it might be. Absolutely. But I do think that was just a great call out, Kathy, about what's in it for me. Because similarly to what Tracy's saying, at a department level, what is in it for them to have this change? I've always done things one way. Why am I going to make this shift now after doing it this way for 10 years? What's in it for me is something we never want to lose sight of when we're rolling out these training initiatives.
Well, and
An
it,
executive sponsor. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Miriam. You're going to add
no,
to that.
I was just going to say, we tend to be very learner centric, but you can see from the needs assessment, of course, we're not just, obviously we're looking to improve the company as a whole, but we do that by one learner at a time, into a group, into a larger group who impacts the entire company. So what's in it for me is all about the learner, the end user. That's how we help improve and reach the company goals as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Sorry, Adam, you were going to talk about the executive sponsor.
Oh,
yeah, Jennifer's point.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it kind of tied in with what you were just saying, I think, Miriam, at on the same level. What's in it for the company as well? That's important. We're all working for a company or organization. Whether it's a nonprofit or a corporation, there are goals that we're tracking towards, and hopefully the training is aligning with one of those goals in some way. And if they are, then it's easier to have an executive sponsor, of course, because they can see what the end goal is, what their maybe big objectives and key results are, and how does this align with those.
Yeah, that's a couple great comments coming into, like, if we can get, if we have the time and we can take a little time to have leads, some others across the company review it and say how much they like it. And then that's sort of that like organic growth of excitement. That's another great idea. Plus they have some buy-in now. If they feel like they're being tapped into for their expertise, then they are motivated to promote it and to share it. And, look what I've done and look what I helped create. And this is a small thing, but having an executive sponsor, having the president of the company or the president of the department or whatever the situation might be, we've often created learning that even has like a short video from that person, right? Just to share their heart and why it's important to the company. And of course, the pushback is always, well, that person doesn't have time and that's going to be dated very quickly. It's not evergreen, all of that. We've had a lot of success recently with AI, creating different kinds of images. Again, this all has to be approved, of course, and because we can get a little spooky here, but we've had a lot of excitement from those executive sponsors to say, oh, that's cool. That's an AI image of me. I can just write something and then the team's going to take it and develop it. And that's the only question, or that's the only ask we have of that executive sponsor, is to just give us, write something that would convey their excitement and promote the program. And then we can take it and run with that.
Yeah, I think that that's especially true as well with our kind of bite-sized communications, that we're having now. And just it has to be like new and cutting edge to really make an impact, you know? So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to call out something that
Yeah.
excuse me, that Bruce had asked. Asked one of the large language models, it's Copilot or ChatGPT, to give me some learning activities to help roll out, this new content. I think that's great, and I think one of the things we didn't add as a waypoint here would be potentially assess what AI tools could be leveraged, as part of this overall initiative, and then that of course opens up some of those other questions about what does the company have access to, what are you allowed to use, and the like. But there's no doubt that a lot of these areas can be supported by some of these tools that are now at our fingertips today. Um, I think we maybe have time just to wrap this up, make sure we get you all out there. Miriam or Tracy, did you all have anything else that we wanted to make sure we covered here before we get ready to close out with a couple of our housekeeping items?
No,
I
I
don't
would
think
just
so.
say that if you're interested, check the chat. JP had some good comments, and so did Jane. Just different ways to configure these questions to get a more like, how are you going to advertise this program? That might your group might like that might resonate better with them. Like, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. Or will this training survive the march of time? How evergreen is it going to be? So there's some good questions in the
Mm,
chat to
yeah.
take a look at. But go ahead, Adam. I think I'm all set if you want to wrap us up.
Yeah, I think just a couple items.
Yeah.
All right, so last one today. This is a more obscure movie. Was a book previously. Uh, the core of our spirit comes from new experiences. Okay, so that's Into the Wild, which is really
Mm.
kind of a sad story overall, but also one that's kind of just great about being out on the open road and adventure. Um, okay, I think that is it for these. Let's move to the last one. So we do have a few minutes here for any additional questions and answers. You can go back to any of the waypoints as well, of course. This also gives you a chance to review anything within the webinar chat. Like Miriam had just noted, there's some really great comments there. But any questions for us or anything that popped up today that we want to make sure we can still cover in the last few minutes that we have? Okay, well, just as we wait to see if any other ones come in, just a couple notes. Oh yeah, here's a great one. Jane had one. Um, what might get in the way of learner performing as they should, other than lack of skill or knowledge? I think that's a really great one. Could be access to the training. There's a number of things, right, that could come in. How do they engage with it? Miriam, any other thoughts on there? And we'll kind of use that as our last question, and
Yeah.
then we'll wrap up.
Yeah. So that really gets at that question that we talked about earlier, which is learning really the answer to the problem? And so by asking like, well, what might get in the way of the learner really performing as they should, other than a lack of skill and knowledge, we could, for example, find out they don't even have enough time to get from one part of the plant to the other, or whatever the situation might be. So that digs into that question. That's a great question to ask though, Jane, because it helps us get at what the real problem is. And then there are a lot of people just asking, will you be sharing the recording? Yes, I know some of you came in late. It will be shared out. And there's a couple questions about AI. We do use AI for voiceover work depending on client preference. But that's something that again goes into our conversation with them and pricing and getting good quality. So those are some good questions too. And Adam, go ahead and wrap us up.
Yeah, just to know, well, so you'll receive a recording of this within 24 hours. It usually goes out the next day around the same time, or tomorrow afternoon. You'll have an email that will give you access to this recording. Just another note: Dr. Jerry Zanstra, who is unfortunately not feeling well today, we'll be leading the next webinar with Miriam joining on that one, which is April 16th on curriculum mapping for global learning audiences. So that's a great one. And there's a link that you can access either through LinkedIn or on our website. If you want to sign up for that one, it is live for sign up starting today. But other than that, we'll reach out with the a link to the video so you can have access to that and share it certainly with any of your colleagues. And there'll also be a resource. So typically we send out like a 1-pager or 2-page resource following every webinar. So you'll see a couple emails that will go out in the next few days just relating to this content today. Thank you all for joining us and for the great comments and questions. It's been great engaging with you all today, and we hope to see you here in April. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.